Good morning and welcome. It is 10 a.m. Pacific time. I am Brandon Laws, Xenium's Director of Marketing, and I'll be your moderator for today. Today's webinar, I'm very excited about this one. It's called Giving Back, How to Build Volunteering into Your Organization. And I've got Mike Calvo from NobleHour. He's here to share why volunteering is good for you and your company. And he's going to give us the blueprint for basically how to start a volunteer program from start to finish and all the benefits you realize from it. So before I introduce Mike, I wanted to just cover a few housekeeping items, which I usually would do before the webinars. This webinar is from 10 to 10:45 a.m., so 45 minutes in length. Mike's got about 30 minutes of presentation material, and then we'll leave enough time for Q&A, probably 10 to 15 minutes. And so keep the questions coming at the very end, and you're welcome to submit things throughout the presentation, and I'll be monitoring those. So if we can answer them during the presentation, we will, but we'll definitely save time at the end to get all your questions answered. And if we get done early before 10:45, that's fine too. So use that GoToWebinar chat window that you see, and I'll be looking at those questions as they come through. Folks always ask if this presentation will be recorded, and if you have to jump off, will you be able to get access to the recording? And absolutely yes, we will have this recording available to you, and we'll send out the recording via email probably 3 to 4 hours after the webinar takes place. So probably sometime early this afternoon, and you can rewatch the webinar or share with your teams. We definitely encourage that. And if you want more webinars and events and content like this, go to xeniumhr.com and subscribe to our updates. And we have a little chat window on our website, and you can just fill out your email address there and just say, I want the updates, and we'll make sure to get you on our mailing list. So that's all the housekeeping items. I want to introduce Mike, and I'll turn it over to him in a second. So Mike Calvo, he leads customer relations and sales efforts at NobleHour. They're a leading volunteer measurement and impact sharing solution. NobleHour is part of the Treetop Commons company. They're a B Corp dedicated to helping people serve the community and tell the full story of their engagement. So professionally, Mike has served in client-facing and leadership roles for a decade and a half. He also serves on various boards and does as much volunteer service as possible around alleviating houselessness and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you got a great presentation ahead, so I'm excited.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon. And I wanted to say thanks for hosting. Thanks for all the great content you guys put out. And thanks to Xenium for.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And you guys really do great work on the HR front. So shout out
Thank you.
to all that stuff. We love you guys. So with that, I want to say thanks for everyone for attending. My name is Mike, and I'm going to go into volunteering and why it's good for you, why it's good for your company, and also the benefit that the community gets. And so when we just go ahead and jump right into it, we're going to start with why volunteer in the first place. And let's talk about it. Let's keep in the back of our minds this idea of there's a benefit, right? Everybody gets something out of volunteer service, volunteers, the community at large, but there's something bigger at play here. So we're going to touch on the benefits that everybody gets and how that impacts the workplace, how it impacts employees, how it impacts the community you serve and your connection with them. And then we're going to jump into the basics of setting up that volunteer program and how to get the ground level foundational things in place. And some of that will be policy, and I'm going to ad-lib a little bit here on some of the things that I know from experiences that we've had working with clients, as well as some of the information we've got from research. So again, as Brandon said, any questions you have, please bring them all, and we're happy to answer. So let's start off with the why. And the why is the first thing you always have to ask. Why do it in the first place? What's the value to this? So the way that we typically articulate this is there's a triple benefit when we talk about volunteering. And I'm going to focus on the individual. And that really is where it should start. So if you are an employer and you're considering putting a volunteer program in place because you want to boost community engagement, you think that it will help with morale, so on and so forth, put yourself in the shoes of the people that you serve, because as an employer, you serve your employees. So it benefits them. It benefits you as the volunteer. It also benefits your community, and that's the community that you serve. So the organization that you volunteer for, or the community in which that organization exists, or the beneficiaries of the services. And that's a very simple connection of one-to-one. But let's go the next step, right? So if you talk about your people, it's the people that you identify with. And we talk about your people, we're talking about your friends, your family, your coworkers, and everybody gets a benefit from your volunteer service. So when I volunteer outside the office, I bring experiences, skills development, positive attitude, all those benefits back with me to the office when I take VTO or volunteer time off. And then I bring it home, and I bring that positive feeling, and I bring all those good things back home to my family. I've got little kids, or a little kid, and a schnauzer. He's more like an old man. But we bring these things home with us. We carry these positive experiences with us everywhere we go. And so the triple benefit really is a succinct articulation of who gets value out of, just say, 1 hour of volunteer service. And so, yes, I'm a nerd. I love Dr. Seuss, have since I was a kid. But this really does ring true for me. So unless you are taking that step forward, unless you really care and you find something that really resonates with you, that thing won't get better unless you put yourself forward. So that's going to be kind of a common theme throughout this presentation. So let's talk about the personal benefits of volunteerism. So when you volunteer, it's kind of what we call the love effect, or at least how I like to articulate it. The reward centers in your brain start to light up. They ignite, and you start to get these sensations of accomplishment and satisfaction, and all of these things that really give you motivation, not only to volunteer again, but to do other things along similar lines that make you want to get those feelings. So when people say, no, volunteerism is purely altruistic, that is inherently an untrue statement, because everybody gets a benefit from volunteerism at a biological level. There is also health benefits. So we know from studies that people can reduce isolation, and that helps with lowering stress levels or anxiety. And in some cases, volunteer service in groups has actually shown to reduce cognitive disorders like Alzheimer's or dementia. And so, and primarily in older volunteers who typically suffer from these things, but in some cases also younger volunteers as well. But lower blood pressure, longer lifespan have all been attributed to people's engagement in community activities and service. And especially because what you're getting is those positive feelings. It's that brain-body connection, all of those things in terms of satisfaction, accomplishment, compassion, empathy, that love, that feeling of love that you get, that all articulates back to the physical world for our own well-being. So we personally get a huge benefit from volunteer service. And the most important thing is to do it as often as you possibly can, not just for the community, but you also get these benefits. If someone told you that you'll live longer, you'll feel better, you'll get more satisfaction, all you have to do is give an hour of your time once a week or a couple times a month to some organization that you truly care about, that's not really a hard threshold to cross, or a difficult argument to make, we should say. It also has career benefits. When we talk about what you get out of volunteer service, again, you take these things with you. I take this stuff back to the office. And when I volunteer, so for example, I serve on some boards, and one of the boards I serve on is trying to alleviate homelessness through providing goods and services to folks who are living outside to try and alleviate their day-to-day struggles living in the urban wilderness, if you will, right? So we're trying to find meaningful and impactful things that we can provide them that are provided by businesses and other community organizations that they can use on a day-to-day basis. And so what I get out of this personally is the ability to think critically around and put myself in someone else's shoes and really start to think critically around how, how living on the street, or if I were living on the street, for example, what kinds of things would I need to live a little bit better or to survive, or really understanding what it's like to be in that situation. Where this translates to business is I'm in charge of customer relations. So every day I have to put myself in the shoes of my clients, in the shoes of the people who use our products and services every day. And so this definitely has an impact on me understanding better ways in which I can put myself in someone else's position to understand what the benefits and values are. I've also been able to develop relationships. We've actually looked to start hiring some people from some of the organizations that I serve on. So it's a great way to build connections, build skills, and it's stuff that, again, you can take with you everywhere you go. So we also talk about it being not just, I'm just going to read this quote because I actually really love it. We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. And so when we talk about giving, when we talk about volunteer service, it really is a form of giving. When you volunteer, time is the one thing you can't recreate. You can always make more money, you can always find more things to donate, but you can't replicate time. And so as a company, you want to be really intentional about that. And you want to be really intentional about it primarily because the next group of workers who are coming up in the ranks, who will be the future decision makers, and in a lot of cases are decision makers now, are millennials. And there's a lot of disconnect now between, and I know that this is something that Brandon and a lot of folks at Xenium have been working with their clients on, and I know Brandon's talked about this before, but millennials have a little bit of a mind shift in terms of how they see their work life and what the values are that they bring to the office or home office, if you will, every single day, how they bring that stuff to work. So in 2016, we found millennials now cross the threshold of being the largest group of the labor force. And this trend will continue for a while. And so what do we know? So we know that they love companies that share their values, not just in terms of where they work, but also in terms of where they actually spend their money. They tend to spend or vote with their dollar, especially with 50% of millennials, roughly 50% of millennials, living paycheck to paycheck. So it's pretty important to articulate the values that you have with those folks that you want to bring into your company and make sure that that matches up. And so we'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about crafting your volunteer program, but this is pretty important. They crave meaningful or meaning kind of as part of their work experience, and volunteer service is a cost-effective, simple way to embed that into the work experience for folks. They love using skills, they love working with their peers, and anytime that they can actually turn a passion into a project, that's fantastic for them. And I hate saying for them because, truth be told, don't tell anybody, I am also a millennial, just on the tail end, but I'm definitely considered a millennial. So the corporate benefits of volunteering. So you got happier people. Your folks are coming in, and it doesn't really matter if they're millennials or not. Studies show that your people will be happier if you have the ability to offer them something that allows them to be creative and kind of control that experience. And so this is why things like volunteer time off do make a big difference. It gives people the ability to get out there and engage and have that positive experience and bring it back to the office. You'll see stronger teams, especially when you can facilitate or at least encourage people to volunteer in groups or teams. And in some cases, we see folks or companies that actually gamify it. And they look for ways where they can challenge each other in a healthy setting around a positive experience. It's fine if you have a sales-driven organization and you're gamifying sales and those kinds of things. That's healthy, that's great. But this is another way to do it that also wraps your entire team into that experience, and it lets people kind of see where they fit and where they can potentially do more, or maybe where they're missing out on opportunities to be more engaged. It also has a huge value for your company, especially in terms of costs, right? So when we see companies that do things that is becoming less and less novel, and a lot of our clients are pioneering this, and I have a small case study to showcase that, is the idea of actually bringing your customers in to volunteer with you. So that customer connection to your brand, to your company, and it doesn't matter as much if you're a B2C or a B2B business, that still has a tremendous impact on loyalty to your brand. And we do have a lot of clients that actually make a very intentional move towards bringing their customers, even if it's other companies or consumers, into the volunteer experience, because that positive feeling, that positive impact that they can make collectively, that's a shared experience that you can't replicate on a sales presentation. Never will happen. It's the only way to do it is to do it in person. There's also studies that show that there is a huge value in volunteering around retention. So kind of touched on it in a previous slide, but really let's get to the brass tacks of it. There are some studies that show that someone is 20% less likely to leave your organization if they have had a positive volunteer experience that's been facilitated by your company. That's a huge, huge value. So we talk about from the benefits from an HR standpoint. That's tremendous. 20% less likely for somebody to leave, regardless of what kind of outside situations that may have existed. That is a huge value for companies that are looking to retain top talent and ensure that people find satisfaction in their work. And of course, the triple benefit wouldn't be complete if we didn't talk about what the community really receives out of this. So I'm going to focus more on what's going on here at home. We may have some folks from all over the place on this in the audience today, and so again, appreciate everybody for joining us. But let me share a little bit about what we see day to day here in the Pacific Northwest, and specifically here in Portland. We see a lot of things around homelessness, the opioid crisis, which again, that touches communities all across the country, all across the world, but definitely something we see here at home. And so when we talk about some of the things here in Oregon that we look for here in Portland, there is no shortage of places where need for volunteers and engagement and people who are just doers to get out there and make a difference. There's no shortage of that need. So everybody can make an impact every single day. So here in Portland, there's a lot of things that we can do. And again, some of this really touches on things that I truly care about. But one thing that we also know, and this is provided by an organization called Independent Sector that tracks the value, the economic value of a volunteer hour. So it's different state by state. Nationwide average is $24.69. Oregon actually leads that by 20 cents an hour. But for every hour of volunteer service, there is an economic impact to the community that is served. And again, in Oregon, it's $24.89 an hour. That is tremendous. And what that means is it's calculated by taking employment numbers, tax rates, and various other economic indicators of the health of these communities on a state-by-state level. And essentially, when someone donates their time, the community at large benefits by this much essentially being put back into the community through their service. In some cases, there are people who make this on an hourly wage. So this is a tremendous amount of work that has actually gone in to calculate these numbers. And this is really a tremendous impact. So imagine if you have 100 employees and you offer, let's say, 8 hours of volunteer service a year, paid volunteer service. And let's say if you're lucky, your folks are volunteering at a rate of 50% usage of that volunteer time off. That's a tremendous amount of effort that's going back to the community that you as an organization get to say and share that impact and say, our people have volunteered for these causes, and this has been the economic impact on the community. And you didn't even have to stroke a check, and you got all those other benefits that came out of it. That's a really compelling story to tell as an organization. So here's a quick case study. We have a client that is around 3,000 employees. They have about 3 million customers that they bring, like individual customers that they bring to volunteer with them for playground builds and programs that support children's development around the country in 47 different markets. Their largest office actually is here in Oregon, and they're actually headquartered in Canada. They will, by the end of the year, make a likely economic impact of almost $75 million. That is a huge amount of impact for an organization of only 3,000 people, and they didn't have to cut a check for that. So that is really compelling stuff that they can say, we did that for the community, and it was just by people giving their time, the one thing that can't be replicated. Again, a tremendous story to be able to tell. So how do you get started, right? So I could say, well, buy NobleHour, and of course I will say that, of course, at some point. But again, it goes back to you. Start with what your people want, what really gets them going. So you can absolutely consider implementing a policy. If you don't already have a volunteer program baked into your HR policies today, start small. You don't have to go crazy about it. Really, you just have to identify what are the things that people do. Now, you could come to a company like us, and we could administer what we call a pulse survey for you, which essentially would be a 3-question survey where we understand what are the things your people care about, and then we can help guide and craft your volunteer program along the lines of what you understand. Or if you have a core mission that you really want to drive home, or something that you as a company cares about, feel free to make that kind of the thing that you want to focus on for volunteer engagement. All of that is great. There is one thing to keep in mind. If you do go the route of taking a survey and asking people, what do you care about? And then you still go a completely different direction, that may be getting off on the wrong foot. So just keep that in mind. But you really do want to, in some ways, if you don't give volunteer time off, at the very least, enable people to find opportunities to volunteer and give around causes that they are personally passionate about. That will go a long, long way. So once you find your jam, find the way in which to connect. Of course, there's us. You know I'm biased towards us, NobleHour, that is. But there's all kinds of resources out there to connect. There's also a lot of opportunity to just find out from people you know who volunteer and how do they get connected. I have had plenty of experiences where I say, oh, have you ever used Craigslist or Volunteer Match or Hands-On or Us? No, I find most of my volunteer opportunities either through my workplace or through friends. Ask around. Just the sheer act of asking is very powerful, because they might say, well, you know, I hadn't thought about that before. And maybe you'll find out you have something in common and someone you can volunteer with. So that just creates a personal connection. Again, something that can't be replicated elsewhere. Another thing to think about is, you know, what way do you want to deliver this to your people, right? So if you're going to help them find their thing, what blows their hair back, consider how you want to articulate that. Do you want to give them this wide open view of opportunities, or do you want to be a little bit more narrow and say, hey, here's some selections? One, the latter will require a little bit more curation and time. So if you're a smaller organization, you may not have the desire to do that. If you're a larger organization, that may be okay if you have people in place to kind of focus in on specific volunteer or cause areas and you want to actually curate that experience for your teams. But smaller companies on the whole tend to want to just give that wide open view and say, hey, find something that's empowering for you, and we'll try and facilitate some group opportunities along the way. Of course, get out and volunteer. That's an easy step 3, right? You found the thing, you found the way to connect, go out and do it, right? Go out and do it, and then when you get back or during, measure your impact. Follow, go ahead and find out what the impact was. Empower everybody to track and measure their own impact and time that they volunteered and what causes and organizations they've served for. It may sound onerous. It's much easier than you think, regardless of what system. Of course, it's much easier with NobleHour. But regardless of what solution you use to track that, even if it's on paper forms or spreadsheets, just giving people the visibility into what personal impact they've made in the community has a huge value. The value of that goes far and wide, because if I can personally see what I've done and almost gamify it for myself, I'm going to go out and do it again. and I'm going to now become an ambassador of the company I work for as a volunteer. You now have goodwill ambassadors saying, oh, I work for such and such company and I'm here to do good. Again, something that's really hard to replicate unless you create an authentic volunteer experience for them. So for basic kind of types of volunteering, there's group events, things that either people can join onto, or as a company, you can curate those. There's ongoing volunteer service where it might be, hey, we need somebody to come in and do clerical work in the office. And you know what? I hate clerical work, but I love this organization, so I'm going to come in and give it my all. That's great. Or if you have skills-based volunteering or micro-volunteering, and I kind of clump them together, but it's similar to like pro bono work. So if you have small engine repair experience, I know that the Restore, which is part of Habitat for Humanity, is looking for you. That's one example. Or if you're a CPA and you want to do some pro bono work, you can use those skills to actually help an organization fill out their tax forms for the coming year. And what's cool about that is some of those things where you're skills based, you can do it from the comfort of your office or your home. You don't actually have to be on site. So that's kind of the idea of micro volunteering, where I can spend 15 minutes doing some work for an organization without having to leave my office. So and I've done this before, there's an organization here in Portland that I've done some work with, and they needed help understanding what is the best approach to putting together their donation CRM system. Well, I used to work in the CRM space a while back. And so with that, I was able to actually provide them some insights by taking a look at some of the offers they've had from different vendors and kind of building a matrix and making some recommendations based on their needs. I didn't have to leave the office. So I could literally clock in and clock out 15, 20 minutes later and have given them resource time and skills without having to step out of the office during the middle of a busy workday. And then, of course, there's board service. And one thing that we're seeing a trend towards is it's not just for executives, right? You don't need to be an executive to sit on a board. Everybody has something to offer. And so when you can empower folks to find board opportunities for organizations, sometimes they just need good ideas. Good ideas come from all over the place. And so empowering folks to sit on boards is also a really great way to empower people to be engaged in the community with causes they care about, and of course, that helps them be an ambassador for your company as well. So I want to give a little shout out to this program we run called Noble Bridge, and this is something we started at the beginning of the year, and it's part of a volunteer challenge we have with the Tech Association. I'm just going to highlight this real quickly. In Oregon and Southwest Washington, we are challenging every member of a tech company who is part of the Tech Association or other companies who have joined on to volunteer at least 1 hour per person in that company. We estimate there's about 73,000 people, so that's about 73,000 hours of volunteer service. That will equate to about $1.8 million of economic impact back to the state, excuse me, and the region, including Southwest Washington. The company that has the highest rate of engagement, our company, NobleHour, will grant $10,000 to the nonprofit organization of their choice. So the company that has the highest rate of engagement in terms of hours per person at that company will get to select a local nonprofit to receive a $10,000 grant. So I really do love that this is an opportunity for us to use our resources and capability to kind of gamify it on a larger scale, and we hope that this is something that we can continue further on. So I want to leave you with this one thought. Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on Earth. And if there's any sports fans, you'll know who that is. Thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over to Brandon to facilitate any questions.
Thanks, Mike. We've been getting a couple questions about the slides and recording being available. So the way we're doing it this time, recording will be available. We'll send it out about 3-4 hours after this webinar takes place. And the slides will not be available, unfortunately, for this, but reach out to me if you have any questions about any of the content. And Mike, his email address is on the screen as well. Okay, so I want to invite people to enter questions into the chat window. We've got several questions already, but we have a good 15 minutes available for Q&A, so feel free to ask any questions that you have. The first question that I want to start with, Mike, Chris asks a question that I think we asked you when you came out and talked to the culture committee at Xenium, and that is, what is that source of data for that economic benefit, the hourly rate? I think it was $24.69 an hour or something like per volunteer hour. Chris wants to know where that source of data comes from.
So that comes from an organization called Independent Sector, and they actually calculate those numbers in every state. So, for example, in Washington, D.C., it's something like $39 an hour. And then if you're in Florida, it might be $20 an hour. So it varies state by state based on tons of different economic factors that they calculate. And that actually is the industry standard across the board. So pretty much every nonprofit that we've come in contact with, that is the number set that they use to measure the economic impact that their organization has had on the community that they serve.
I mean, the numbers.
And it's only one way really to measure impact.
Yeah.
That is commonly used. It's kind of across the standard or across the board standard, but there's a million different ways that you can really measure the impact and its ripple effects on the communities that are served.
Well, it's funny as you were mentioning that number, and then I think you said, like, if you had 100 employees at 8 hours of volunteer work, I mean, like, you don't even have to write a check, and that's almost $20,000 worth of economic benefit just based on that number.
Yep,
it's incredible.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it really is, and again, it's a great story to tell for companies big and small.
Yep. Okay, next question comes from Susan. How does an organization find a volunteer opportunity that aligns well with their values and mission? So if the organization probably believes something, they have their values and mission set, and they want to probably attract people and get them rallied in the community around their set of values. How do you find opportunities out there in the community that aligns well with what you believe?
I mean, there's a lot of ways I can speak to how we help companies do that. But in terms of, and this is a really common challenge, right? So when businesses are trying to craft an experience for their people, finding something that does align with their mission and values, sometimes it's something that kind of leans into marketing a little bit, or it's something where, hey, this is the boss's pet project, and that's what we consider our values. But the first thing, again, is kind of feel it out, ask people, and do a survey if you want, and kind of find out what it is that blows their hair back, if you will. And then, finding those things, first thing, Google, right? If you don't have a service like NobleHour that can make those intentional connections for you, Google is going to be your best and easiest friend. There are almost 4,200 nonprofits just in the metro area of Portland alone. So, while it's a pretty close-knit community, it's pretty big. So there really is something out there for everybody to find that they can align with. If you were to use a system like NobleHour, we are trying to crack the code on, and we're actually in the process of building this, is matching people towards causes that they care about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great way to do it. And then we're looking to do that at a group level as well. So kind of matching your organization with other organizations within the software. We also have a service that we provide where companies give us a list of their kind of values and things that they want and the kind of organizations they want to connect with. And then we actually go out and find those organizations for them in the various locations, and then make those intentional connections, and then start feeding opportunities through those nonprofits directly to them.
This might be a good opportunity to just describe NobleHour and the platform itself. So would you describe it as a way to kind of socialize the volunteer opportunities that are out there? So like if I'm in an organization with 100 people, Xenium's about 90, 100 employees, and let's say we're all on the platform, then I can see what Susie or what Angela is what they're spending their volunteer hours on, so I can sort of see like, oh, there's an opportunity. Like they're doing this. They've spent this many hours on it. Maybe I want to volunteer as well. Like, is that how you describe it with the kind of the social aspect?
To some extent, I think, if we go a little bit beyond it, it does have some of that. We are in the process of making it a little bit more kind of building communities around cause areas, if you will, so you can see the people in there who align with your causes and kind of what they're volunteering for. Um, but we didn't want to recreate Facebook, right? So the whole notion of the platform was to be able to do the two things that are really in our mission, right? Empower people to find the thing and connect, to engage, and then to be able to tell their story. So those are like the two core aspects, and the finding of the thing, and the thing being anything that you want to engage with. That's an element that we are actively pursuing partnerships, and we recruit nonprofits on a regular basis to join our platform for free. So that way they can post and connect with the multitude of volunteers that join up every single day. So the social aspect kind of isn't there yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit more of a personal experience. And I think that's okay, right? It's starting with really, what is my personal impact and how do I connect to the communities that I want to engage with?
Yeah. So I think you had mentioned this, and also the data is really showing that millennials, and even I guess if you look even further back, the Gen Z that's coming into the workforce, they're very socially conscious, and they're community driven, and they want to align themselves with organizations that are conscious about what kind of impact they're making in the community. So I want to ask you a question. This is just for me personally, but how do you highlight volunteer work that you're doing, or even work in the community that you're doing in the recruiting process? Because I think, as employers are really trying to fight for talent, not only do they want to obtain really really good talent and people that would do good in their organization, but they also know like working in the community is a really important thing to do. So how do you use and highlight some of the things that you're doing to your benefit as an organization? Does that make sense how I'm asking that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a great question. We actually just went through a huge hiring round. We brought in 8 people for a company that is almost 40 people now. That's a lot of folks. So we do it in a couple ways. It's not so much about about saying the volunteer experience and the impact is not, well, we don't really use that as kind of a marketing tool for us. We're fortunate because we're the folks who are building it, and we're a B Corp. So our mission really is centered around community. So we try to bring that into our day-to-day. And so one of the things we articulate is how we as a company measure success, right? So we measure success by not just our volunteer impact, but because we can see the numbers that everybody puts into the system and how much energy is being put into the system from volunteers, we can clearly articulate that one of the biggest metrics that we track is number of active volunteers and hours of service and total impact, right? So those are actually the metrics that we use. And then we look at things like sales revenue, net new logos, those kinds of things. Because we're very fortunate in the way that we're structured, and we're a B Corp. So that's how we really articulate, the people, planet, and profit. We also really do have that benefit because of that people see that as that's where they want to work. So we're getting a lot of wonderful folks who know that because that's baked into who we are as a company from the very outset, that they know that they're joining an organization with a mission behind it, not just that they're just not a cog. Like there's a cause behind every keystroke, every phone call, every interaction. Like there's a mission that we're driving towards to engage, or to enable engagement for more people in the community. And I think that's a really powerful story to tell. And so if you are an architecture firm, right, or you are a grocery store, it really doesn't matter. Everyone has the ability to make a difference, and as long as you have a way to kind of put that into how you operate as a company and how community fits in with the work you're doing, that's a great way to tell people, like, this is why you should come work for us.
This next question might be a quick answer. So Cami asks, what was the organization Mike mentioned that could use volunteers for diesel mechanics? Do you recall talking about that?
Ooh, Cami, I think I got an opportunity for you. That's Habitat for Humanity's Restore. They tend to get a lot of, so it's maybe diesel, but a lot of small engine repair. So, for example, I know that they get a lot of like lawnmowers and small generators and things like that that come in to the Restore, and their whole mission is to repair those things and put them up for sale to fund housing development. So it's a great opportunity to engage if you got the skills.
Incredible. You'd mentioned earlier gamifying volunteering, and specifically, I'm curious how you would go about gamifying the volunteering aspect.
So there's a couple ways that we like to do it. We track kind of top volunteers by number of hours. We also track groups. So we've got this concept of, and it's not really fair in our office because half of our team actually lives on the technology side of the equation, and so and then the rest is split between client facing and then like finance and marketing and things like that. So the technology team being so big, they can always like kind of crush everybody with one volunteer experience. But when you have relatively equal sized teams, there's ways to actually take the total value of hours and then multiply it or divide it by the number of people you have and get rates of volunteerism. So that's one of the ways that we do it to kind of reward and award teams for their volunteer work out in the community. So that's one way that we gamify it here in our office. And one way that has been really, really effective is when you as a company find something that you care about, a cause, and then people volunteer for those causes, regardless of the organization, but the cause and the mission that that organization has, versus volunteering at my kid's school, for example. If children's education is not something you care about, or well, you don't care about it, but it's not something that you focus on as part of your kind of values and things like that as a company, but let's say sustainability is really your thing. Fantastic. When people volunteer for sustainability, you count that as a credit towards something. And so there's also kind of a reward aspect that companies oftentimes bake into their kind of gamification.
Okay, I think we'll end with this last question here. It might be a big one for you. So I think in a perfect world, an organization might just close their office and go out and volunteer in the community. But for organizations that really can't do that, they need to keep the doors open during the workday, but they want to offer time during the workday for volunteer hours. How do you go about doing that? Like, if you can't have everybody leave at once, have you seen some creative ways where employers can allow people, whether it's in groups or individuals, to schedule their own time? Like, how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So, really depends on the type of business that you are, first and foremost. So are you a manufacturer, are you a retailer, professional services? So when you can't really close down, I've seen it done a couple different ways. Some companies actually work with nonprofits to bring the experiences into the office. So for example, I can't take everybody away for a few hours, but I can take small groups of people away for 15, 30 minutes, an hour, but then they can go right back into working because it's in the office. And so sometimes organizations are glad to bring things in to the office. So for example, we've got one organization that actually they put together kits to be given out to the homeless here in the city. And so sometimes they'll bring all the supplies in the office and they'll ask for teams to actually start packing the kits and putting things inside the kits. And then we take them away and we warehouse them until it's time to give them out. So that's one example. We also have some organizations that are manufacturers that they bring people in and they have it just on a rotating schedule where people will come off the assembly line and actually come back to work, and they kind of rotate folks to backfill in those positions so folks can actually take a break and get a little bit of volunteer experience and learn about a cause that they might want to volunteer for outside of the office. So that's one way to do it. That takes a lot of coordination as well. If you're able to say, hey, we're going to rotate, we're going to try and do, you got 100 people, for example, groups of 20, and we're going to try and do 5 opportunities a year or a month or whatever that cadence is, and kind of let people rotate out. That's a great way to do it as well. And again, it takes a little bit of coordination, but it's totally worth doing. And then, of course, there's also the volunteer time off. So if you give that benefit for people to go out, you don't have to have the whole team leave at once. You can still have people go do something that's meaningful and impactful and bring that back to the office without having to put your whole team or department out of commission for an hour or so.
Okay, we are right at 10:45. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the webinar. This has been a lot of fun. I know NobleHour is working on a new product. Maybe you want to mention that in closing and just kind of give some people a sense for what you guys are up to.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. So we've got a bunch of new things coming out in the new year, right at the beginning of 2020. So we are in the process of ramping up to a new look, feel, and flow with a lot of new features that are going to be added in just as part of people's ability to make an impact, tell their story, and in some cases, definitely gamify the impact that they're making across their teams.
Fantastic. And where could people learn more about NobleHour besides just emailing you, website or any place you want to point people to?
Yep, getnoblehour.com, or feel free to email me anytime with any questions. I'm always happy to answer questions for anybody.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mike. This has been a lot of fun, man.
Hey, thanks very much for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, take care, everybody.